Thank you for joining us today. My name is Brendez Wineglass, Walker's Legacy City Director for New York City. I am pleased to serve as your moderator today. Named in honor of Madam C.J. Walker, Walker's Legacy was created with a mission to cultivate an ecosystem of access designed to inspire, equip, and engage a global network of professional and entrepreneurial women of color. You can learn more about Walker's Legacy by joining us online at www.walkerslegacy.com. The Cowork and Connect virtual morning chat series is aimed to learn the best practices from remote work, the importance of mentoring, staying sharp while staying in, financial planning for small businesses, and self-care routine tips during this time of quarantine and social distancing. So let's get started with today's program. Today's guest is Kendra Speed. Kendra brings extensive experience in both ethnic and general market research in diverse categories, such as consumer packaged goods, tires, higher education, real estate, museums and cultural institutions, employee services, and media. She has strong skills in advanced research methodologies, including non-traditional approaches such as consumer connects, as well as more traditional methodologies such as concept development and evaluations, innovation development, in-home, in-store ethnographies, and exploratory focus groups. In addition to a strong background in quantitative methodologies, she has an extensive experience in leveraging qualitative insights to deliver actionable input to quantitative studies, such a tongue tie. Kendra has a depth of experience in strategy and vision setting across a broad range of categories, including beauty, household care, tires, and real estate. Kendra's expertise and consumer empathy reflects in her ability to quickly build rapport and produce insights with consumers from diverse backgrounds, incomes, genders, and ages. Kendra is the current head of customer strategy and insights at Dropbox Incorporated, where she leads a customer and market research team focused on identifying, sizing, and in-depth understanding of the global markets where Dropbox operates. Welcome, Kendra, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I feel very welcome. I appreciate that introduction and apologize for any tongue twisting.
No. It's fabulous. You're absolutely fabulous, and I appreciate and have the honor of addressing and introducing you this morning. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And what a morning it is. Like, it's exciting to be on with our pearls in preparation for everything that will happen today.
Absolutely. So Kendra, if you will, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. I know I just gave that lengthy introduction, but maybe tell us something that we don't find in your bio.
Oh, great. Thanks for the challenge. So a little bit about me. I live in Austin, Texas. I work for a technology company and very passionate about people. I am the wife of a Baptist pastor, so operate in ministry in addition to my vocation. That's just a little bit about me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And to your point, it's such a remarkable morning, right? We all came, we rose to the occasion. We stepped into our role. And even though we're away from each other, we're together in our pearls, together and feeling proud to have something to get up for, right? And so I'm excited for our conversation. And so with that, I'll dive right into the first question. So what has been your overall experience in leadership?
Yeah. So as I think about leadership, I will say it started from an early age. There's always this question, are leaders born or nurtured? I think it's probably a combination of both. My first leadership experiences were within my household, influencing as well as enrolling and engaging others in my house, my siblings, to the types of things I wanted to do. More formally, what I will say is going into the academic setting of college, leadership began first as just in charge of different, student organizations, so student government or sorority. And for me, it was always about seeing the opportunity to serve, seeing the opportunity to transform and extend the vision, and wanting to be a part of that. More recently, it looks like, serving in a variety of different industries, where I might have, management of a team. And other times the leadership really looked like influencing and working and gaining partnerships to be able to bring about, desired results. I think the big thing for me is leadership is not necessarily about legitimate titles. It is about the way that we are engaging with others and influencing them with our own unique thoughts and moving business objectives, personal objectives forward.
That is absolutely excellent. You've said a lot there about how leadership, began in places in your household, and that, we'd like to believe that charity begins at home. I think that something refreshing with this morning, right? This morning's the official swearing in of our sister Kamala Harris and seeing Joe Biden step into leadership. Do you believe Kamala in some way will bring some of that household leadership that Black women are and multicultural women have been able to do? I mean, I think it's what's carried us through, right? And I feel like we're getting some of that in the language that's being used in some of the speeches, but to put some accountability to that influence and to that policing and that nurturing could be something good towards healing here in America. So I love that you spoke about student government and how, whether it was leading a bake sale in your class or whether it was just trying to organize the thoughts of your peers, there's an opportunity to mediate, to influence, or to actually mobilize. And so those are just different styles of leadership, and you don't have to hone in on all of them at the same time.
Oh, definitely. I think it's important to be, how do we talk about it? Like really being able to be agile in leadership and understanding what a specific situation, necessitates. So I will be, leaning in to see the great things that Kamala, our, vice president will do.
Madam.
Yeah, exactly. Madam Vice President will do, because we know that it's not always just one leadership style that will prove successful. And it's about how you're able to blend and kind of finesse that leadership to be able to influence in places where you might not have legitimate authority and build partnerships and coalitions. So it's great to even just see the road to getting here and then really in anticipation of what we will see moving forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. To take us to our next question, how have the expectations of leaders evolved in the age of COVID? What new characteristics have emerged as important for those to lead?
Yeah. So as we all know, 2020 was a tough year, and we continue to, be in these instances of where more and more people are working remotely. We have, disparate teams who are striving to work together. Some of the things that I really observed, and I will say personally in my own leadership experiences, as well as those around me, some of the challenges of last year really centered around things that were looked at as soft skills prior to last year. So things like the ability to be vulnerable and to really demonstrate vulnerability in this virtual world in such a way to be able to draw out other people. Because as I think about my teams, as I think about my coworkers and colleagues, people were dealing with a whole range of things. There was, adapting to being on at all times, to working from home and having a blending of boundaries. There was also the emotional and mental health pieces of some that might have been, alone in their homes and living spaces. And so for me, one thing that I found was doing the pause before going into the business and really just doing that sensing of saying, what's going on, sharing what was going on with me internally, and really having those conversations that open up the dialogue so that, we could be honest with each other and really talk about the things that were going on around in our context that we were then bringing into the business world.
Absolutely. So there's, vulnerability. I think you hit the nail on the head there, because there's so much that comes from actually achieving the free will to be vulnerable, right? There's been a level of transparency, a number of curtains have come down. I think even to speak to the casualty of how we're meeting online, right? I don't, there's so many business suits that have been put to the side because we don't have to put on an extra layer. And I think the physical barrier actually being removed, in addition to the circumstances of the space, have allowed leaders to really up their following by being vulnerable, or up their influence, if you will, just because people want to do business with people that they can let their hair down and feel that there's a level of trust, and that comes out of the vulnerable conversation. So to take us to our next question, what opportunities do you see emerging for leaders to shine and somewhat, leapfrog those outdated leadership skills? So you kind of just spoke to the soft skills. And so these hard skills that you're talking about, how can they leapfrog?
Yeah, so there's some things around, agility and resilience. I would still kind of say that's a blending of some of the soft pieces, but really being able to be adaptive to change, because that's one thing that we are sure of. We don't know what tomorrow will bring, but we know that change is constant. So the ability to really kind of, gird up and say, I'm going to roll with the punches. I'm going to anticipate what some of those can be, and really, proactively strategize and think through and see opportunities in the midst of challenges. So I think that's one big thing, the agility, and then also having the resilience, because there are going to be things that knock us down. In my context, I think about last week, we just laid off, 10% of our workforce. And it took a lot to be resilient, to want to come back into work this week, to look coworkers in the eye and know that part of our force was no longer with us, and being able to really be able to see forward and say, what can we do? I think there's some other pieces here too, is like really thinking about taking influencing skills that we were able to hone while being in the physical world together in an office setting, and saying, how do you bring that online? Because when we were in office settings, we could look around and you could sense when things were going on, or you could see people meeting in conference rooms. You could read people's, body language and see things going on. Today, I'm somewhat constrained by the meetings that I'm invited to, the type of information, the Slacks that I get, and kind of keeping me plugged in. So that really becomes a call to action for me to say, what are things that I'm doing proactively to influence, to engage, to connect and communicate with my colleagues, to make sure that, I'm just in the game.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you have a very entrepreneurial spirit, and I love that. Oftentimes when individuals find themselves doing the dance between corporate and being an entrepreneur, they think they have to choose one over the other. But it seems that you have a very entrepreneurial spirit to be in your workplace and to connect with your colleagues in a different way. But I read it in your bio, but it reads just off of your glow how empathetic you are in your leadership and in leading teams. And so I thank you for all of your anecdotes this morning. So the next question is, in what ways may we pull our collective energies toward not just surviving, but thriving in this new normal that we find ourselves in?
Okay, thank you for the question. I want to go back to just one thing that you mentioned about this entrepreneurial spirit. Part of that I attribute to coming up in a family of entrepreneurs, where my family had a company for 25 years, and we worked in the business space. So a lot of this was just ingrained in the household, and one of those things that I bring with me, regardless of if I'm in a small business, a larger company. So that's just an anecdote. As we move on to really thinking about like this collective and really thinking about how we come together and really help driving each other forward in leadership. For me, I really think it comes down to partnership. So in partnership, it's being able to personally identify those things internally that I might not be as strong at, or places that I really want to shore up. And then looking for places to, one, develop, but then two, also partner with those who may be strong in that, and that we would enjoy mutual benefit from being connected. So I think it's very important that we're reaching out to one another and really just being frank and candid in the discussions of the challenges that we're facing and seeking help. Because I think part of this is, again, the vulnerability to be able to say, I don't have it all figured out. I could really use some thought partnership here in really figuring out where I go from here, or how I think about the opportunities in the face of challenge. This is not to say that these evolving skills are something that should solely come from within. These are things that we should be leaning on one another as, you know, a community of women, in thinking about how do we band together so that we all win.
Absolutely. So I love that you spoke to so much about relationships, and when it comes to relationships, not just thinking that, you know, our networking is upward, but actually horizontally, and looking right to your classmate, and looking to your peer, your colleagues, you know, your fellow at church, and in these common spaces, because those are the spaces where you already have invested your life and your energy, just because you're present, right? And so relationships, you know, matter. And then again, when we think about who is a leader and what is a leader, and today, again, when I think about, you know, the symbolism of the transition of power, and how one leader thought, you know, it's I, me, my, and in my way or the highway, and that I have all the answers. Whereas we're transitioning into a space, specifically, I'm going to hone in on Kamala's HBCU background. And I think the nation and the administration, and we're beginning to see, just in seeing how the team is being put together, right? Reaching out to the thought leadership that, you know, you don't hone, but which is necessary. And beyond that, believing in that leader to rise to the occasion and step up. So I love that, you know, when you take an introspective and you look at self, you know, what kind of leader are you? Is the real question. And so I want to ask you, in what ways have you adapted your style to speak to the needs of those you lead, both formally and informally? I think you've shared a little bit, but I would like to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest piece, there are a couple of pieces. So one is in the vulnerability, and having the confidence that it's okay. Because I think, you know, when I came into kind of the business world and came with the, you know, the training, think about kind of the inroads model of training of being a good business leader, I personally felt that I could not bring 100% of myself to work each day. Very early in my career, I had an outside of work life, and then I had an inside work life. Being in the technology industry, being, you know, almost 20 years into my career, at this point, you know, what you see is what you get. You know, this is who I am. I'm the same way, you know, within this conversation that I am within my home, that I am within my community. And so really just saying, like, the vulnerability is okay. This is not something that's going to be used against you, but in many ways, it's drawing people into you. So that was one of the biggest pieces. The other piece is just setting boundaries and prioritizing, because, you know, as you grow in, you know, management and leadership influence, it is key to say, like, putting boundaries on your time, prioritizing those things that are going to have the highest impact. And so for me, last year it was about setting boundaries, being very clear about those things that I was going to do, and purposeful about those things that I chose not to do and why. And being able to have those conversations without feeling like I was failing in some way, but instead was really able to narrow in and focus on impact.
That's really, really awesome. I love vulnerability, and I love your intentionality in setting boundaries, prioritizing, and impact. And that speaks to a purposeful life. And I think we all aspire to love where we work and do the work that we love, right? So that is extremely awesome. So I want to switch and hear your input a little bit on technology. But before we get there, I wanted to hear your feedback on how much of your leadership style and your relationship building leans in on your mentorship and your sponsorship at work, even amongst your family and friends, and what that dynamic looks like. Because, I think when people think about themselves as a leader, or maybe don't, right? Because oftentimes leaders don't wake up knowing that they're leaders. Another leader, taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you have this, you got this. And it takes a level of mentorship for that kind of nurturing. Whereas, sometimes people don't always have the opportunity to speak with you 365 days in a year, but when an opportunity comes up, they speak your name in a room, and so that speaks to the level of sponsorship that may happen in your life. How has that, if you will, molded you into along your leadership journey?
Yeah, so mentors and sponsors, are crucial and critical, and have been so in growing my own leadership capabilities. So, and it's even today, I think about, conversations I have with mentors. So one, and especially at this point in my life, one thing that I'm finding a lot of the conversations I'm having with my mentors, with executive coaches, are around this belief in the truth. And when I say the truth, it's the truth in who we are internally. Those experiences that we've had, the validity of those experiences, and what that means and how that comes to bear on the opportunities and challenges that we meet from day to day. So a lot of times what I find is that mentors, sponsors are really tapping in to those aspects that already reside in us. So it's really challenging our ability to lean into those truths that we already know about ourselves. So it's been extremely important. I also want to turn around and saying at some point, and I think it was always like even early on in saying it was important to me to also think about how I was mentoring others, because I think that this cannot be a one-way street where I'm seeking a mentor. I want to be sponsored so I can get to this level. We also need to be looking around us, those coming behind us, and saying, how can I invest in the talent that is coming up alongside me? And so I believe that I spend a lot of time in thinking through that and taking time to meet with informal, mentorship relationships, but then also, just availing myself to have conversations as people want to bounce things off of me. And then the other thing I think is important that you talked about is the ability to speak someone's name while you're in the room and being able to advocate proactively on the behalf of someone else. And that's something that I've seen work well. You mentioned kind of like the spirit of HBCUs and some of these networks. Being an HBCU graduate, like I know that spirit. That's kind of the spirit.
It is the spirit to do so, to serve, to take up space, to to make a pedestal for another. My motto is, if I can, I will. Right? If it's in my capacity, why not? It doesn't harm me to hold something that works so well for you, and to do better at that for one another. So I love that. I love that you've put so much attention on the youth, and it certainly takes a village if we know anything. And times have changed. I think conversations have been challenging intergenerationally about what can and cannot be done, what's appropriate in the workplace and not in the workplace. And you want to help mold a leader that won't break, right? I think some of my best and bosses, if you will, or mentors, if you will, were people who were hard on me, to honestly, or not even on me, on the room. The tension was thick, right? But the ability to be in that space and to see vision, the goal was outside of this room, and so it just gives perspective and molds you how to have that kind of foresight when you too have to make those decisions for yourself. So advice is free, experience you pay for, is something that I always say. But we definitely have to look at our youth and say, how are we making them the responsible, right, and accountable, and the adults that we would like them to be, so that they too can rise to the occasion. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on rite of passage programming. Rite of passage and what that looks like, programming for young men and women, and in your experience, how can we be better? How can we contribute to circles that contribute rite of passage for Black and multicultural children?
So this is interesting because I think that there's a whole spectrum as you think about, rite of passage and what that really is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really is centered first in, again, truth. Because I think in some families, I won't attribute it to a whole culture. In some families, there has been this tradition of not fully acknowledging the whole truth as a way of protecting, members of the family or of the unit. And so one, I think transparency is important as we think about, rites of passage, being transparent about the challenges, but also the wins, because I think that's where the real learning comes from. We need to be able to, in those rites of passage, needs to be more than just about conduct, the way that we look, the way that we show up, from a physical standpoint. It also has to be about, the education around the truths, helping with the mental models to really say, how can we successfully navigate as you go from boy to man, girl to woman, and really aiding generations in being able to critically think and assess to be able to navigate. And the other thing is creating these linkages so that we're able to create the legacy. So, oftentimes we might just pass on the torch and say, like, it's on you now, like, go off.
Right.
Oftentimes we still need to be shepherding along the way and helping to chart that path. And also in many aspects, going and clearing the path ahead of time so that it's an easier walk for those coming behind us.
Absolutely. So, the education never stops, but I always think about that. The youth yearn to be led, right? The youth, their minds are moving a mile a minute. Their energy is on action, and they want to be mobilized. And so when we think about opportunities to intersect with our youth and meet them when they're prepared and ready and have the energy, what do we have to offer them, and what could that look like? Especially since education as we know it has shifted, but what doesn't change is that the youth have to be taught, and that they will one day be responsible adults making these very decisions we're trying to get through day to day, and we owe it to them to your point, to be honest and to help them think critically of what is happening and how they play a role in what is going on. And so I appreciate you for taking that question. And so I'm going to take us to the tech. So let's talk a little technology. In what ways are you seeing technology being an enabler to leadership? Are there any drawbacks to more business relationships moving onto digital platforms versus in person?
Yeah. So, what I will say is first, I think technology is proving to be a great enabler as it relates to, expanding the leadership footprint. Just
Mhm.
thinking about, I take like your everyday pastor who might have pre-COVID just been working in a part of the community or in a neighborhood, and today having platforms, such as Facebook, YouTube, on, is able to now expand that into a global footprint.
Mhm.
So just thinking about just the overall expanse of that, I
Mhm.
would also say on the flip is there's a lot more noise in the system, and it's a lot more of a challenge to think about, like, how do you continue to innovate as you seek to broaden span of control of leadership. The other piece is, it's bringing people together who might not have been able to interface in the past. I think the other thing is that it is so easy that there's so much going on. Like, there's a lot of noise. Technology can sometimes prove to be somewhat of a distraction. The other thing is you don't know what's going on once, you pop out of the Zoom and you're kind of captive for 30 minutes and then moved on to the next thing. I think that, tech in a lot of these conversations moving into the digital platform, you're losing some of the nuances that you can get from full body language and nonverbals.
Mhm.
Also, in ensuring that everyone is engaged and engaging, I think that it creates the opportunity for people to potentially fall through the gaps, and that becomes a leadership imperative to say, how do we keep people in the boat? How do we keep people engaged? How do we ensure that people are not becoming fatigued with being
Mhm.
on all the time? And so I think it's a whole myriad of
Mhm.
pieces. And for me, again, it comes back to those things about, like, with technology and setting boundaries, in being innovative within the platform to say, how do we best engage? What are the best engagement models for work moving forward? Um,
Mhm.
as you think about, some work is not best suited to us actually being in a Zoom. It might be something where we work async and we collaborate offline to be able to kind of allow that time for thinking and processing.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a myriad and still being figured out.
Absolutely. Technology is a bit of an ocean, and we're still swimming. you know, we're we're closer to the beach than we are out in the water. To be quite frank, there's so much in policy that we're going to need to see happen to kind of humanize this digital landscape that we are really taking on as a global community. In many ways, the question comes up that, our business is moving too fast. I mean, maybe someone's moving too slow. I think it depends on how you observe the glass. I'm a nerd. Technology to me is fun. It's elevating. I think if anything that we've got out of this pandemic and going into the digital spaces, that we've fast forwarded 3, 4, 5 years into work models that offer flexibility. It does challenge the mental health, and I think either model had its strain mentally, and I think we're working on that balance. And so at this time, I'd like to ask the audience if there are any questions on Facebook and YouTube. Take this opportunity to drop them. Uh, Kendra, if you would like, you can grab a glass of water. I'll grab a glass of water. And we'll see. But thank you for sharing your insights this morning. You just sound so passionate, and I'm just I'm just so excited for this morning. We're all excited for this morning. Leadership is so important. Is so important, and the notion that we can all contribute influence. And the irony is that you really don't even know who's falling in love with your smile every day, right? You don't know who you're impacting just by being you. And you've shared that a lot of all of the qualities truly that make you a leader are innate to you. There isn't much teaching of that. However, with positive relationships and mentorship and sponsorship and kind of relationship building along your peers adds to your ability to be an agile and vulnerable leader.
Well, I appreciate you, Brendez, for guiding the discussion today, for opening up the space. Of course, we are against some hard programming with everyone tuning in to inauguration events. So I appreciate the opportunity to share on the platform. I think the work that Walker's Legacy does is important work in driving forward women in entrepreneurship and business. So just excited for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So thank you for this wonderful conversation, Kendra. How can people stay in touch with you?
Sure. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Kendra Speed. I'm also on Facebook, Kendra Speed Sellers. I do have an Instagram and a Twitter presence as well. So I will say between one of those avenues, please very much reach out. I appreciate those who have tuned in. I welcome the opportunity for partnership and, continued conversation about leadership.
I love it. I love it. Please follow and subscribe to Kendra's journey. And with that, I will wrap out this morning's event. I look forward to seeing you guys all soon. Walker's Legacies programming looks to bring you insightful and meaningful opportunities for conversation and community. And we hope you found that today during this special Hangout opportunity. Have a wonderful morning, everyone. We'll see you next Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. For our vision board. So please bring all of your stickers and magazines and join us for future Walker's Legacy programs by visiting us at www.walkerslegacy.com.